I'd like to read an interesting story to you from the October issue of the Christian Womanhood magazine. It's called Fred's Story. It's by Brenda Nickerson from Westminster, Massachusetts. When the Bible says to love your neighbor, it can be a challenge, especially when they don't really want you in their life or you have nothing in common with them except a street address. You don't know their names, what they do for a living, or what their story might be. But how amazing an act of kindness can be in opening doors to share the gospel. At church, I heard how a woman had baked pies and took them to her neighborhood for the opportunity to meet new people and share Christ's love. I immediately thought of one of my nearby neighbors whom I had never met or seen outside, not even to go to the mailbox. The only sign of life was an occasional light that would shine in the evening when we passed what appeared to be an abandoned house. I decided to make some pumpkin bread and take my son with me to deliver the bread. Together we went on a mission to introduce ourselves to this mystery neighbor. This was not a welcoming neighbor by any means. The house was dilapidated, the yard unkempt, no trespassing signs were posted on the property, and the front door had an additional wrought iron protective door, all signs confirming that this neighbor was very guarded and private. I nervously rang the doorbell, no answer. Then I knocked a bit harder and rang the bell again, and a few minutes later an older gentleman came to the door, keeping it cracked just enough to show his face. He asked gruffly, "What is it you want?" The stench from the house was repelling, and I was glad to be outside. I replied, "Hi, my name is Brendan, this is my son, and we are neighbors from up the street. I brought you a pumpkin bread and just wanted to wish you a happy Thanksgiving." With a pause he took the bread. Then when I asked him his name, "Fred," he replied. I apologized for taking more than 5 years to finally meet him. He then told us how he had health challenges and lost his wife and lived alone with his dog and cats. My heart felt so bad for him in his loneliness, and with Thanksgiving Day just days away, I invited him to join us for dinner. He rejected my invitation and said he needed to go. He closed the door. I turned to my son and said, "Well, we've just met Fred. He's a lonely man and needs Jesus." Thanksgiving passed, and soon Christmas preparation were in full swing. One evening, while setting up our tree and stringing lights, we could hear the pattering of rain, sleet, and wind. Our lights flickered, and then the house went dark. We had lost our power, and not an unusual event in our area during storms. My husband fired up the generator, and we finished decorating the tree and went to bed, with our cozy wood stove keeping our house warm. As we slept, the rain pelted for hours in freezing temperatures. In the morning, we awoke to loud sounds of snapping trees, which went on for hours. Outdoors, we could see everything was coated with an inch of ice. The weight of all this ice on trees and branches were causing them to snap and fall. Most New England states declared a state of emergency, with millions of homes without power. It was going to be several days to weeks before roads could be passable and phone poles erected again. Grateful for our generator, gas appliances, and wood stove, we knew in the interim that we would be warm and comfortable. Within hours of daylight, neighbors came with tractors and chainsaws to clear the roads, and then I remembered our lonely neighbor, Fred. We checked in on to see if he was okay. He came to the door wrapped in heavy layers and a blanket and said, "It's so cold I have no heat. This is a widespread outage, and it may take days to restore power. Please come to our house to warm by the fire." We begged Fred, but he declined. The following day, with temperatures now sub-freezing, we feared Fred would freeze to death, so we went back and told him that power wasn't going to be restored for a while. He could no longer stay in a freezing home and needed to go to a shelter or come to our house to warm up. He was so cold his lips were blue, and my husband finally convinced him to come. Fred reluctantly agreed. Seating him right by the wood stove, we heaped blankets on his shivering body and asked if he'd like some soup. "No," was his quick reply. After about an hour of thawing out, we offered him soup again, and he reluctantly took some to eat. We love having people in our home. We enjoy the many family and friends who have passed through our doors, but Fred was not a typical house guest. He was cold, gruff, and private. At 81 years of age, it was clear life was hard for him. His appearance was as unkempt as his house. His unshaven face, his disheveled clothes, and his body odor gave the appearance of a homeless man, but we knew God had brought him to our lives for his purposes. We told Fred he was welcome to stay with us until the power was restored. He kept saying no and that he needed to go back home. We realized his main concern was for his pets. We had sent a dog, but when we asked how many cats he had, he simply said too many to count. We offered to take him back home to check on and feed his pets twice a day. Coaxing him to spend the night in a warm house and bed, he finally conceded. Our 3 boys were teenagers, and as typical school-aged kids, they were excited that school was canceled for over a week and enjoyed staying home playing games. Another couple in their 80s from our church family also joined us for the week. The boys bunked together, and we made room for our elderly guests, making them as comfortable as possible until they could return to their homes. The days that followed were spent making meals, sharing stories, watching old reruns, and playing games together. June, a former church pianist, would sit at the piano to play hymns and songs from the 40s every evening. Fred would chime in as he remembered the old tunes. The boys taught Fred some new games, and he sat at our dining room table for every meal. He slowly warmed up, and we learned more about this man. Reared in New York City by adoptive parents who, as he said, never allowed him to eat at their table, never treated him well, and died when he was a young adult. He had been an antique dealer and had been married for only a short time when his wife died of a sudden heart attack. He never had siblings, cousins, or children of his own. He had only one friend who lived out of state, whom he talked with every evening at 10 p.m. That was his life. He spoke up openly about the Lord, how he loves us, and how he protects us in storms of life. He gave us guidance to train our children, and he had woven our lives together for this 1 week. Fred began to comment on how kind the boys were to each other and to him, how welcome he felt at our home, how he enjoyed our meals, and how he had never had love shown to him in such a tangible way. He tried hard to convince him that our shower was also open to him, and we took his clothes and laundered them to make him more comfortable, and us as well. When sharing the gospel or sharing spiritual truths, he often changed the subject, and we didn't want to open up his heart to this topic. After the record-breaking ice storm and 9 days of sharing life together, the power was finally restored. Everyone was able to return to their homes. Fred was now more than a neighbor. He was become a friend and a part of our family. Christmas came a week later, and this time he welcomed our invitation to join us. We were delighted when we saw he had clean and dressed in his Christmas red sweater as he approached the door with a poinsettia and a smile. The months that followed gave us an opportunity to bring meals to his home, mow his lawn, and run errands for him. He came for visits to our home. We invited him to church several times, but he was always declined. One morning a call came from his one and only long-distance friend. She said, "I called Fred several times last night at 10 p.m., like always, and he didn't answer. I'm worried. Can you please check on him?" We assured her that we would and went right over, rang the bell, and knocked loudly, calling for Fred several times. Finally, we heard a weak voice say, "I fell." We called 911, and the first responders came, broke down the door, and carried out a weak and scared old man on a stretcher. He had suffered a stroke. Sadly, his stroke caused brain damage, and the doctors were unsure if he'd ever walk again. We called our friends who stayed with us during the ice storm, and June's husband, Richard, went to visit him first. Once again, he shared the gospel and prayed with Fred. I came just as Richard and June were leaving, and they told me he had finally surrendered to the love of God and had accepted Christ as his Savior. I know he slowly became a changed man. It all started with the ice storm. His cold and hard heart had slowly melted as he sat by our fire, as we loved on him with soup, kind words, and fun times. We saw his heart slowly respond to the love of God through our family and Richard and June. We prayed every night while he was in our home for our food, for God's provision, and for his salvation. Every day for those 9 days he heard the gospel and saw it lived out before him. A week later, Fred was placed in a rehab facility. We went to visit him on his 82nd birthday. My boys joined me, and we brought a cupcake, a big birthday balloon, and a birthday card singing "Happy Birthday" as we entered the room. We wished him well and encouraged him as he worked hard on his rehabilitation. He cried when we all gave him his card, cake, and balloon. He said he never remembers having a birthday party. I was so thankful for how God brought our past to cross, and that we were here celebrating his first birthday as a new creation, an old man but just days old as a saved man. We prayed with him and then left. The next morning I received a call from a nurse at the rehab facility. She told me that Fred had passed during the night on his birthday. We rejoiced that Fred was now enjoying a welcoming reception in heaven. Isn't that a sweet story? I just loved it and wanted to share it with my listeners. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice.